Welcome back, everyone. Our next speaker is Dolores Johnson, author of Say I'm Dead, a family memoir of race, secrets, and love. You may have seen the article about Dolores in the Buffalo News on October 11. She has also published essays on mixed race, racism, and identity, and she is a graduate of Harvard University and Harvard Business School. In her presentation, she will discuss some of the unique writing tools involved in writing memoir and the difference between writing for the family versus creating a central theme for a published story. Dolores will have your presentation up in just a moment, and then you can take it away.
Thanks, Leah, and welcome everyone to the memoir session. Thanks for joining me, and thank you to the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library for having me on this program. The unique aspects of writing memoir will be illustrated based on the experiences I had. Can you see this? In publishing Say I'm Dead, a family memoir of race, secrets, and love. It was published by Chicago Review Press earlier this year in 2020. So next slide, please. Let's start with a definition. Memoir is nonfiction and fact-based. So unlike fiction, which I see some of you are fiction writers, there is no making up material to go into memoir. It must be truthful, and there have been issues around people who did give the genre a bad name by fictionalizing some of their stories. So we want to be careful that we're always fact-based. Next slide. Certain considerations for writing memoir that the author wants to keep in mind, first of all, is your own personal exposure. This is such a personal genre where you're exposing things in your life, your attitudes, your fears, your mistakes, your troubled relationships, or whatever the case may be. Be careful in deciding what's in and what's outside of your limits, because once it's printed, of course, you cannot take it back. So what is it that you really want to include is an important point. And when you are looking at that personal exposure, be aware that a critical element of writing memoir is casting a critical eye on yourself. What have I done that may have been wrong or a mistake, or how have I misinterpreted, or what could I have done differently? Those are all truthful points that readers are looking for, and publishers will be really scrutinizing your manuscript for. Secondly is sensitivity of family and friends. The memoir writer has got to be sure that they have considered the relationships that they have and what the stories that you write in your book may mean to those relationships. So let's talk about memory as part of that. The incident that happened at the 4th of July picnic last year, you remembered it as one thing, and I remembered it as another thing. So when we're writing those kind of different perspectives, one piece of advice is to be empathetic to other people's viewpoints, unless, of course, your book is aimed at really emphasizing one side of the story. And you have to be clear about what it is that you want to portray in your manuscript. Secondly, under sensitivity of family and friends, has to do with all the skeletons we have in our closets. I have them, your family has them, everybody has them. And once you uncover some of those skeletons, you dig deep in order to tell a truthful story in your memoir, lots of people are not going to want that story told. And so which skeletons are you going to excavate? And what is the reaction going to be among family and friends? And is that an important priority, or do you want to tell this story regardless? So these are just some general factors to think about when you decide on what is in your story and what is not. The third consideration I'm pointing out here is that we're going to be discussing writing for traditional publication, which is different from what Avril just covered for self-publishing. So in this world of traditional publishing, you will submit your work through an agent. You will write formal queries to get an agent, and they will be sort of the business go-between between you and editors at publishing houses. The editors are the people who are reading piles and piles of manuscripts to decide which ones the publishing house is interested in. And let's be clear, publishing is a business. Traditional publishing is about dollars and cents. So what that editor is trying to decide is, one, do they love this book enough to promote it within the publishing house, which includes a lot of other departments. Once they all buy in, the question is, can we make money? So unlike self-publishing, where you're looking to sell your book for any number of reasons, because you want the story told, because it's burning inside you to tell this story, because you want to make some money, this is, when you're dealing with traditional publishing, a matter of dollars and cents, which can disappoint a lot of authors, when you pour your heart and soul into a manuscript, that it comes down to many rejections based on dollars and cents. And rejection is the name of the game. Very seldom will you be able to get your book sold on the first try. I've never heard of it, actually. Once a publishing house does buy your book, you will be paid. That's called an advance. And afterwards, there is a long march to actually putting that book out in the world, including editing, and as some of the aspects that were covered for self-publishing, you also have the cover art, the promotional plan, the marketing, and then you're seeking public media reviews to get the word out on your book, which can be appearances on radio and television, coverage in newspapers and magazines, public appearances, speaking at various forums. So that is the route to traditional publication. This is unlike, let me point out, writing a family story for the family. And many people think about memoir as giving a record to their family, but that's not what we're talking about here. We are talking about publishing a story that will go into the public market for consumption by a wide readership. Next slide, please. Some of the particular tools for writing memoir and getting it published traditionally are to look at, first of all, the scope of your story. And those of you who are authors may know some of these points already, but let me emphasize them. What is the time frame of your story? Lots of people approach memoir by thinking about their entire lives. But if you are creating a story for public consumption, there should be a locus to the story, a center. What is this book about? What time frame did it take place in? What's it about? Is there a critical issue here, or a certain event that we are centering our story around? For example, could this be about the love canal and experiences and difficulties that resulted from the love canal? That's a particular period of time. It may or may not include your childhood or your old age, for example. This is about a hero relative, somebody who did something really outstanding and interesting. And what was that thing? How does your story matter to the general public that's reading? That's what we're trying to create when we decide on the scope. Secondly, here is what I have on a card that sits over top of my computer when I'm writing. What have you come to say? Meaning that of all the things that we could talk about in our memoir, how do we boil it down to the point that we are trying to convey? Because after all, a story has a point. Every story has a point. And the way you know that you have finally figured out what you have come to say is when you can write a 1 or 2 simple sentence description of what the book is about. Let me give you an example off the back cover of my own book. Say I'm Dead presents 3 generations of mixed-race love as Johnson's family mirrors America's sea change in attitudes from Jim Crow's abomination to a majority acceptance of interracial marriage. I can't tell you how very, very long it took me to create that particular statement on what I had come to say. Thirdly, let's talk about research. Since we have a fact-based story, it's really great to be able to anchor it in some research, which may include interviews with people who give you quotes that you can use in the book or clarify certain incidents that you're trying to find out about. There are documents that can help you. If you need to know the dates of someone's birth, death, marriage, there's other facts that you can find out. Was their marriage actually annulled, or what was going on there? And there are photos that may really help you describe what the person looked like or what the event or the venue was in a certain scene. And of course, if you're talking about something like the Love Canal, there are many, many articles that you can research to give you additional facts. Next, let's talk about creating a story spine. When we begin our book, we find our protagonist, ourselves, on page 1 in situation A. But situation A is problematic. And what we are going to experience are a number of scenes of obstacles, difficulties, conflicts that help us arrive finally at the very conclusion on the final page of the book at situation B. Now, that's called your spine. And there are many, 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 many things that happen in our life that don't belong there if you are curating or creating a storyline. So what you wore for Halloween in 1999 may have nothing to do with the Love Canal story. However, you just love that story. It's so colorful, it's so funny, it's so rich. It doesn't belong in this book. Put it aside for another time, another story or article, and stick to your spine. When you take out that thing you really, really, really love and want to tell, but doesn't belong there, it's called killing your darlings. And every author has to do that. And let me then talk to the last point on this slide, which is making a universal story and not a memoir. I first heard the word memoir from an agent that turned me down. And it means that if you are writing a memoir that's only me, 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 me all the time, nobody cares. I went here, I did this happened to me, is not a story that everyone out there in the universe is anxious to read. However, if you're writing what happened to me relative to the Love Canal and how the powers that be, or big business or pollution impacts the lives of so many people and makes us think about these broader issues and then illustrate it with your personal experience, now we have a very rich, meaningful memoir of which we can make a story and tell people what we came to say. One way to talk about that is to say that there's a camera on the protagonist or the scene, and when you write a universal story, you move that camera off of you and onto these issues, these other players. Next slide, please. In traditional storytelling elements, we combine those aspects with the uniqueness of memoir writing. And I want to point those out because it is a blend. Character development. Be sure that we are talking about the each character. What do they look like? What is their job? What's their background? What do they speak with an accent? Are they from elsewhere? What do they like to do? What are their hobbies? Where do they live? What does it look like? A second aspect of general storytelling is to identify 5 to 7 key scenes that anchor your book. Each of these scenes relates to what you have come to say. So there are very large incidents and situations that are going to be in these scenes. And in one, let me give you an example from my own book. When my husband and I bought our first home, there was a cross burned on our lawn. It was a horrifying night. The police came and they didn't care. This is part of what I have come to say, a look at racism in America. And that is an anchor scene in Say I'm Dead. Finally, on this slide, let's talk about creating an intentional narrative structure. And by that, I mean that we're going to take these 5 to 7 key scenes and the important other writing that is the glue that holds it all together and decide how we're going to shape this story. How are those pieces going to fit together? Are we going to go in straight chronological order? Are we going to have a scene, a chapter for Mama and a chapter for me and a chapter for Mama and a chapter for me? Is it going to be thematic? Are we going to talk about educational racism, and then we're going to talk about housing racism? These are different ways to fit the pieces together. Next slide, please. It's a lot of material to cover, and I think that some additional resources may be helpful to you. And on this slide, I have several craft books to start off with that help you learn how to write memoir. And these books are written by famous writing professors at universities who specialize in memoir and storytelling. If you don't have time to read all 4, the one I'm recommending is Vivian Gornick's The Situation and the Story. This is a very fundamental read that will help you create your memoir. Mary Carr is The Art of the Memoir. She's written several memoirs that have been really big sellers. Sven Burkett's The Art of Time in Memoir talks about flashbacks and flash forwards and other techniques that can be put in to help you reclaim your memory and to advance the story along your spine. Roy Peter Clark is also a writing professor, and his book, Writing Tools, has a lot of really great techniques in it. Other resources I recommend to you is working with a writing group. I have a writing group. I have 2 people who are as dedicated as I am to getting their material completed, and who can tell you, you have a hole over here. I don't understand. This part is confusing. There's a scene I'd like to see that's not here, and help you with your manuscript creation. That has been very vital to me. Another suggestion, a resource to you, is to study other people's memoirs. There's some very well-known memoirs that you can look and see what is the structure that they utilize for their narrative. What have they come to say? What are the key scenes in those books? And The Glass Castle is a really famous one and a great one, and Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Very popular books that can be used to educate yourself on how to write memoir. And the final resource I'm suggesting is to take writing classes. I was a business executive most of my life, and when I went to write my memoir, I gave it to a creative writing teacher who said to me, "You know what you have here? It's a business report, and you don't really know how to write this genre or creative writing, and you should take some classes." I did, and those changed everything for me. And so with that information, we're ready to take some questions, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dolores. So we have about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please send them to the chat. But to start off, your book was featured in the Buffalo News last month. How did you get them to write about your book?
Well, again, with traditional publishing, you were really looking for media outlets to review your book. That can be talk shows, blogs, blog talks, TV appearances, magazines, newspapers, and so forth. And when you go with traditional publishing, often there is a publicist at that publishing house that is sending out advanced review copies of your book to potential reviewers. And so here on, this is my ARC, and you see this is not for sale. It is the version of the book before it's the final proofreading, but it goes out, and Buffalo News was one of the organizations that my publicist sent an ARC to. And initially, the disappointing news was that the Buffalo News was no longer doing as many book reviews as they used to. And that's a factor for news organizations all over the country where they've had to cut back staffs due to financial reasons. However, it was important in one of the reporters' opinion to have a Buffalo story told in Buffalo. And so Mark Summer there at the Buffalo News undertook to write the article that appeared in the Buffalo News, and it came out October 11th. The cover section of the Gusto section, and he wrote this article on Say I'm Dead, which he gave me this front page placement in Gusto, as well as a half page the next page in, which is a great boost. Everybody wants their book to be recognized and for people to know about it, and I really am grateful to the Buffalo News for featuring Say I'm Dead.
Great. I think Mark Summer is here today, so hello to him.
Shout out to him. Thank you, Mark.
And we have a question from Sharon who says, I read your book and enjoyed it. How long did it take to write? And she loves the Buffalo landmarks.
Thank you, Sharon, for that. I took a very long time to write this book. And I want to say to everyone that writing a book for traditional publishing is more of a marathon than a sprint. It takes a lot of time to get all the aspects in that the traditional publisher really wants, and you can't sell it otherwise. What I started out with was a business report, as I was told, and so I went back to school. Actually, I took a one-year program. I wrote several versions of the book. First, I wrote it as fiction because I thought that might be more popular or easy to sell. However, some of the feedback I got was dismaying because I was told, oh, you should take this character and really blow them out to something that pops off the page. For example, my dad, who was African American and had a lot of racism affect his life, I was told, make your dad the angry black man who's turning over tables and cussing all the time. That'll sell books. Well, I didn't want to write that about my dad. And so I decided to write memoir, which then meant I had to go back and reconstruct through research, as I talked about earlier, all the things to make a truthful account. My family, my father is African American, my mother is white. They fled Indiana, where there were laws against race mixing with a punishment of prison time and a threat of lynching. I went back to Indiana and researched all of those laws. I talked to the Indiana Historical Society. I received a photograph from them of the lynching that scared my family. I read the laws. I read the national law. This stuff takes a lot of time to get right. I went and interviewed the people that are in the book, so I have a lot of their actual words. So to answer your question, it took 8 years, including 2 years in the drawer when I was stuck and didn't know what to do with it.
And Angelic asks, what inspired you to write and have a creative mind?
What inspired me to write and
have a creative mind?
I was burning to tell my story after discussing it with some people I knew that were reporters. They were professional writers. And in casual conversation, when I talked to them about my family story, they all said to me, "You should write a book. This could be a book." And the more I got that kind of feedback, the more excited I got about writing the book. But for me, another part of why it took so long to write this book is, as a business person, you have an analytical mind. Facts, budgets, deadlines are not creative activities. So I had to learn how to switch to a creative mentality. But once I got into it and so I started to learn what the craft was, it was very exciting and fun to be able to create the material in the book in my best possible way. And that meant learning how to write metaphors and description and dialogue and really channel characters and feel what those scenes had to portray in order to tell what I had come to say.
Nancy would like to know where you took writing classes.
Right, even though I'm a Buffalo native, grew up there and went to school there, and my family is still there, and I come back often. I currently live in the greater Boston area, and there is a place here called Grub Street. It's a creative writing center. You may have similar resources in Buffalo. I can also say that sometimes there are adult education programs or college courses that you can take as one-offs in creative writing or memoir writing specifically.
And I think this might be our last question. Someone says, thank you for an excellent presentation and giving us a global view of how to write memoir. But even when writing only for family, do you have a guideline for determining what is important to include and what's just noise?
Sure, thank you for the question. Thanks very much on the compliment. When you're writing for family, you can, again, you want to talk about your scope. What is my trying to do here? I have a relative who has these massive binders in which every birth certificate and death certificate, marriage certificate of every person is recorded. Is that what you want? Or do you want to write a story? Do you want to tell, maybe your family came here from overseas and they established their own business, and from that you grew to people who became local community anchors. What's the story? That may be another way to go about it. It could be a scrapbook. It can be pictures. My own book has lots of pictures in it because I wanted to illustrate who the people were and the situations that were included. Like there's a picture of my grandmother, who is pertinent to this story because she was the product of a plantation rape. My grandmother was half white, but nobody ever told me because the story was so horrid. So what is it that you want to accomplish when you're writing for family? That's a decision up front, and then you work towards that.
Thank you, Dolores, and thank you everyone for your questions. We will share Dolores' email and emails of the others in the Indie Author Directory, which will be sending out next week.